Welcome everyone to our Wednesday evening Bible study. We're delighted, Alicia and I are delighted to have as our guest Clara Tucker Clemons, affectionately known as Mrs. TC to her students at Highland Elementary School, and beloved teacher in our community, and we are so honored that you've joined us today. Susan Porter from Fifth Avenue works alongside Mrs. TC. You can share stories about her if you want. That's okay. We could get some stories from Susan. And so Susan has put us in touch with TC, and we are so grateful. This conversation is one of several that we've been having after the death of George Floyd under the knee of a white police officer. Many weeks ago now, there's been a national conversation about racial injustice and racial healing and racial reconciliation. And as a predominantly white congregation, we want to do our part in listening with humility to each other within the congregation, but specifically those of us who are white Christians, listening to our black Christian sisters and brothers, because we are family in Jesus. And so we will talk about Mrs. TC's story. We'll listen as you share with us, and we'll talk about the experiences that you've had in terms of racism, in terms of ways in which your experience of life, for example, is different from mine, from ours, simply because of the color of our skin. And we'll also talk about Jesus.
Yes.
We will talk a lot about Jesus, because Jesus is who unites us, and Jesus is the way forward for healing and for reconciliation and for justice. So if you would start, just tell us about yourself, tell us where you're from, tell us how God has worked in your life, how you came to teach, and how you came to Huntington.
Okay. I am called Mrs. TC. TC stands for terrifically cute. I came to Huntington in 1981 to teach. My first 17 years I taught at Geneva Kent, my beloved school, and then I was put on Revs. But God knew that it was time for me to move to another school. So I ended up at Highland Elementary, which is now my new love. And I've been at Highland over 25 years. And I know it was God that called me to teach, because as a child, I always played the teacher. Whether I was the oldest or not, I always played teacher. And I found out later that my grandmother was also a teacher. And I heard her say one day as I was playing with my cousins that one day she will make a great teacher. And she didn't live to see that happen, but they tell me I really am a great teacher.
I think you are.
That's what we've heard as well.
And so, and I don't call teaching my job. This is something that God has called me in to do. He has also anointed me so that I don't just teach. I instill wonderful things into my kids to let them know that they can be anything they desire, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what people said about you. Regardless, you can be anything you desire to be. And my ultimate goal is to always instill hope in my children, to let them know as long as you hold on to hope, anything is possible. And so I'm looking at teaching just 2 more years, which will be 44 years with everybody else's kids. And my son is 44, so I've been teaching that long. And so I'm just looking to do 2 more years, because God has said it's okay if I desire to retire. But that doesn't mean I will stop doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I'm really honored, humbled, and pleased to be here with you guys and to just share from my heart.
And we're glad you're here. And you invited me and Susan to be a part of a Zoom call that I guess is it the state teachers?
It's West Virginia Ed, Learning from the Community.
Okay.
With Jenny Anderson.
And so it was a privilege to be a part of that. One of the and you functioned as the host of
Yes.
that. And one of the things that I appreciated about that call was the African American students, college and high school students that shared. Can you share with us some of the experiences that they, or anything really from that conversation that stood out for you?
What stood out for me, and it goes right back to my life in school, that they have had very little exposure to Black history in the schools. Very little exposure. And as far as when I was in school, zero exposure. And my first thought was when I was in kindergarten and there was the little book that we read out of, Dick and Jane and Sally and Spot, but there was no TC anywhere. And like, I was wondering, like, why is that so? But I never questioned anybody. And then the older I got, still no TC anywhere. I remember in my 11th grade civics class, I asked my teacher, I said, "Where are we?" And he was like, "What do you mean?" I said, "So we're reading civics and we're reading about people that did things in this country. Surely we did exist, but where are we in the books?" And he just stopped and looked like, great question. Because he had never thought about that because he is white. And the books, the authors of books are predominantly white. So it's not a thought to be inclusive of anyone other than yourself. So if Black people were not talked about, neither were Native Americans, neither were Italians, neither were Mexicans. So it just left a whole bunch of history out, which is very unfair, because my America should also be your America and our America together. But for some reason, and the real reason, is because the white people dominate, so they only see what they see. And so, like, for instance, I asked my students a question, because instead of looking at February just as Black History, we went into March, and then school was out. So I said, so how many of you for the first time have had a Black teacher? I had 29 students. And all these hands went up. They had never experienced a Black teacher. And I said, so how does that make you feel? And they're looking like, I don't know. Because I live in a white community, why should it make me feel different? But were some of you hesitant? No, because we already knew you, Mrs. TC. But kids that come from other counties that walked into my classroom, it's like, this has never happened. I'm not sure how to take this woman, you know, and I've never interacted with a Black teacher. And so that just makes it sad.
Yeah.
Sad, you know. And I am the only African American teacher in my school. We have a few African American students. We have biracial students, but the majority of our kids are white. And I think God did that on purpose. He sent me on purpose because he knew I would totally be out the box. Totally out the box. You know, like, there is nothing you cannot ask Mrs. TC. And she will talk to you about anything, any question, like, how'd you get your hair that color? Or why is it curly today? And it was straight yesterday. And how did you get it out, like, way out there and today? Right. So they have all these questions that nobody would have answered if I hadn't have been there. And they felt free to talk to me, like, does your skin get browner in the sun? Does yours? And they're like, yes. I said, so does mine. Does your skin burn? Does yours? So does mine. And they're like, really? And I remember teaching children's college at Marshall University, and I had a little student from Wayne County, and she walked in, and here I am. And of course, the first thing she noticed was my color, and she said, how did you get that color? I said, oh, God did that. She's like, can I touch it? I was like, yeah, come on. And her grandmother is standing in the background like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And she said, well, how come it doesn't rub off? I said, can I touch yours? How come yours doesn't rub off? And she's looking like, I said, it doesn't rub off. God did that on purpose. And she's like, oh, okay. And that was the end of her conversation. She was curious enough to ask. She was curious enough to make her grandmother uncomfortable in the asking, but she wanted to know. And so when you want to know things about people, you get uncomfortable and you ask. But that's the problem. We have not been uncomfortable enough to ask questions about things we don't understand, or even things we have no knowledge of. So I make my classroom very comfortable. Ask me anything you want to. And so as blacks and whites, we have to get to that point where it's okay to be uncomfortable.
Was there was in your career, from the very beginning, were you comfortable in having students ask questions like that, or did that come along with experience?
Well, I think just growing up, and my mom just taught us to love everyone. Even though we lived in a black neighborhood, I went to an all-black elementary school except for my teachers. Some of my teachers were white. And I remember my first experience with racism. I was either 7 or 8 years old, and my mom and I are walking to the hospital, which there's a back road which was easier and quicker, and there's a little girl in the yard. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. And she starts screaming, Mommy, look, niggers, niggers. And I looked like, what does that mean? And immediately my mom grabbed my hand and we walked away. But my mom never talked about that. But I knew that was something that was not nice. But my thought was, as I grew older, someone had to teach her that. You just don't know that. And I remember another incident. I was in Roanoke, Virginia with my family, Christmas shopping, JCPenney's, feet worn out from shopping. I'm just going to wait. And as I was standing there waiting, this little girl turns around and says, look, Mommy, niggers. And her mom turns red. And I was so tired from from shopping. I was just so tired. It would have been a teachable moment. And I was just like, I just don't have time to do this. And the mom tried to apologize, and the little girl says, but that's what you say.
Wow.
So I really didn't have to say anything in that incident. The little girl told on her mom. And I was just like, this is so sad to still be going through this, or to get looks from people because is it my hair? Is it my color? Is it the mask, my hair and my color now? But it's like daily, but in some ways you just become immune to it, because I have to be comfortable in my skin. If it makes you uncomfortable, then I'm sorry for you. But don't go out there and try to get a tan to look like me and then be afraid to approach me in this skin that I'm in. So when we get to the point where we are okay to be comfortable,
Right.
then we can learn a lot. And you know, I am a teacher and I love to teach. And so I always make my classroom open, free to express yourself. And my kids just do that. So if we can just teach each other to be uncomfortable, to learn about each other, because there are things that need to be learned. There are truths that need to be brought out. There is an elephant in the room, and it can no longer be ignored. There is an elephant, and it's a big elephant in the room, and we have been ignoring it. And I go to a mixed congregation as well. And I explained to my pastor that all we want is that you acknowledge that what we feel is real. What we have experienced is is real. No matter if you don't understand it,
Mm.
it is still real.
Mm.
And please just acknowledge that. And if you can acknowledge that, then we can have a conversation. But if you're not willing to acknowledge the fact that these things happen to your member, your elder, your praise and worship leader, TC, then there's a problem. We can't get to that bridge because surely this is not true. Surely it is, because I've given it a name and it's TC. And it's not just my story, but it's other people's story. But I just happen to have the voice for it. I've been given the voice to share this. And as Christians, yes, we have to acknowledge that there's an elephant in the room. And you cannot avoid talking about it. Because what's going to happen is that the elephant is only going to get bigger. And we don't need a bigger elephant. We don't even need an elephant in the room. Because if we have a discussion, the elephant will go away.
And you have a question.
Well, before we get
Yeah,
to that,
yeah.
I was wondering, will you tell us a little bit about, you told a little bit about it, but I'd love to hear more about your growing up years and the
Okay.
environment. It sounds like your family was very nurturing and very pro-education, just
Yes.
really encouraging.
Well, see, my mom, and this is the thing, my mom only went to 7th grade. And she said the white kids would have a bus, but she would have to walk to her school. But the thing with my mom was that she loved Jesus. So that made all the difference in the world. When you love Jesus, then you are able to look in a different way than someone who doesn't. And even though the mistreatment that she received, I can't put that off on my children. I can't plant that seed in them. And I was so happy, like, when we didn't have the conversation, because I felt my mom knew at that time this is way too much to put on my child. And I was like so thankful for that. But it also saddened me that my mom had to deal with this.
Right.
And she had dealt with this. And there were stories she never shared with me. And when I thought about that, I was just like, how could you be so loving? And I mean, how could you go and work for white people? How could you do that after knowing what you've gone through? But I went to, like I said, my elementary school was all black. Integration came when it was time for me to go to high school, and it was not welcomed. There were a lot of riots, and when I say a lot, there were a lot of riots. There was a lot of tension because that school thought we were invading on them, and we felt that we were taken away from where we didn't want to go. And so with that, in our high school, because I just believe God called me as a peacemaker and as a lover. I just truly believe that. Even before I seriously, totally gave him my life, I believe he called me to be a peacemaker. And so I remember one incident coming from lunch, and all the black kids would kind of like hang out on the wall. We call it the wall. All the white kids would hang out on the campus. And I came from lunch, and I was like, whoops, it's quiet. I mean, it was silence. All the black kids on the wall, all the white kids over here. And I was like, what's going on? And they're like, the black kids were jumped on the trade school bus, and we're not going back in. You're not going back in school. And they're like, no, we're not going back in. I was like, but we have to go back in. You know, we have class. And I heard on the intercom, the principal is saying, we need to come in.
Yeah.
And we need to come in, and nobody's moving. And my thought is, I have to go.
So there's this standoff at school. What happened next?
I crossed the bridge, and the students parted. It was almost like the Red Sea thing, you know, and because I was coming in peace, I was coming in love, and I was only one person, and so I'm just one person, and I'm gonna make my way back into this school. And my hope was that the other black students would follow. That was my hope, that if one person crosses that bridge, that others will follow. And others followed. And it was necessary that day not to stand separate. It was necessary to come together. But it was necessary that somebody lead them.
Right.
And I'm just a peacemaker. And I didn't want my mama fussing at me for being late. You know, let's keep it real. You know, I didn't want to be in trouble with my mom. You know, and I knew I was obligated to go to school. And I just knew that I knew that God had just anointed me for such a time as that. I knew that. And so I just made the first step, and the rest of them followed. But then we had to have some talks. I had to have some talks with the principal, with the counselor, like, this is not right. Things are wrong. How can we correct them? What can we do? Because there were all kinds of clubs that the white kids had. Dare we be part of those clubs? Dare we think that it would be okay to be part of those clubs? But no forethought, or like our homecoming attendance, and there's only so many black students, and my best girlfriend and I were selected to be on the homecoming court, but you can only have one. So what do? Because the votes are going to be split, which means nobody will get on the court. And so I told her, I was like, look, I'm not all about this. You go for it. And she's looking at me like, I'm like, yes, you go for it. It's okay, because we have to be represented. We are part of this school, so we need to be represented. And so she was on the homecoming court. And then the following year, a black student was homecoming queen. First time forever. And I think the last time before our school closed. But I mean, that was like really major. And there was another issue, like we had National Honor Society. One of my favorite teachers told me when I was a senior that you really qualified for the National Honor Society in 11th grade, but I'm like, what is the but? She said, but we had enough black students. So you couldn't be on the court. I was like, I couldn't be part of the National Honor Society because you had enough black students? She's like, we were only allowed so many. What kind of sense does that make? But she didn't tell me this until the 12th grade. And on purpose, being rebellious, I have not always loved Jesus, but on purpose, I didn't wear my dress clothes for the National Honor Society as a senior. I knew I had the grade point average, but no one had told me. So I come into school and the principal calls me to the office. He was like, oh, we forgot to let you know, and it's, you know, like, we're so sorry, but you are on the National Honor Society. I was like, really? He's like, yes, and you really need to go home. And I was like, really? And he's like, yes. But I was like, okay, so you didn't have enough blacks this time. So you had to make sure I was on it this time. You had to make sure you had your number. But, you know, like little things like that, just why is that necessary? What, and this is the question, like, are you afraid of my color? What is it that intimidates you about my color? What is it? what is it? It's just a color.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, God created all of us, and surely He knew what He was doing
Mm-hmm.
when He decided what color I was going to be. You know, surely. So what is it about my color that intimidates you, that makes you afraid, that scares you? You know, and so like we went to a cookout this weekend. One of my husband's work buddies, and they have 7 kids, 6 or 7 kids, and I met a little girl named Audrey. And first she was very shy, and they live in Gallipolis where they only see white people. Okay, but they had seen my husband before because they know him. Well, here comes Mrs. TC with the red hair, and like, she's really friendly too. I don't know about this lady. Well, by the end of the day, before the end of the day, we were best friends. Her mom sends me a picture. She says, I want you to see the picture she now has on her phone. It's the 2 of us. She said, you are now her best friend. Exposure. Exposure. If all of your friends look like you, there's a problem. I mean, like, white people come to my home for dinner. As a matter of fact, white people live in my home. We kind of like adopted a young man who went through the drug program. He says, I'll only be here for 9 months. It was a year. But it didn't matter because God blessed us with a home, and we opened up our home to those that need to come in. And the funny thing was, he said, my choir director was at our house one day. He says, I have a question, TC. I said, what is it? He said, I have noticed that all the people that call you mama, they're all white. Do you have any black kids at all? I was like, yes, I do, for real. He says, but everybody at me calls you mama. And he said, and they're all white. And he said, and I love that because this young white boy is walking down my steps, and he's like, who is he? He's our son. That's who he is. And we live in a neighborhood where we are the only black family, but we have 2 Indian families, and we have the rest of the families are white. And so they know my kids. Like, oh, TC, I see you have another kid moving in. I was like, yes. And then one of my neighbors said, I think it's wonderful what you do. But it's just what God has called me to do. It's not about their color, it's about their need. They need a place to be, and our home is a place where you can come in and you can feel loved and you can feel comfortable being in our home. You might make everybody else uncomfortable, but it's okay because this is our home. And so if everybody looks like you in your friend group, you're missing out. Right. You're missing out on diversity. You're missing out on great soul food. I'm just saying. Right. You're missing out on great soul food. But we need to be able to come together and everybody not look like us. Because I told my kids, how boring would it be if everybody looked like you? And they're looking like, well, I don't think it'd be too boring. I'm like, seriously. And like, you're right, Mrs. TC. I had one student when I taught my first year at Highland, my first 2nd grade class, and I would talk about Black history. And some of my parents were upset because I showed a short clipping of the dogs in the water hose. But I said, this is for real. I do not want this repeated. If I can touch my kids right here, that they know this is wrong, they will not repeat it. I don't want to sugarcoat racism. I don't want to do that. And one of my students, Gayla Flora, she says, can I tell you something? I said, yes, Gayla. I wouldn't care if you were polka dot. I would still love you. And then she says, can I say thank you? I said, for what? She said, you could have went to a school where there were kids and teachers that looked like you. You could have. But you chose to come here. And she said, because you came here, we know things that we would have never known about Black people. And I said, so Gayla, I have a question for you. She's like, what? I said, what if I came to your house? She said, you can come to my house. I said, what would people think? She said, well, they'll probably be peeping out the window, Mrs. TC, because black people don't live over here. I said, okay. She said, but Mrs. TC, if you keep coming, they'll come out on the porch and then you'll start talking to them. So, what you gonna do, Miss TC? I said, I'll be over your house this evening, Gayla. But she was right. And the more I came, the more they came out. And of course I'm the friendly one. Hey! You know, it's like, oh, yes, I'm talking to you. It just made it easier to be accepted in the community. Not everybody knows my name. And not just because of the color of my skin, because Mrs. TC loves. And so I remember teaching at Kermit High School. Well, one other teacher had been there for 17 years, black teacher, and then I came. Totally out the box, totally out the box. Anything you want to talk about, let's talk about it. They're like, so, how is your son a different color? His daddy must be white. I said, no, his dad is black, but he's like really light. I said, it's called slavery and ancestors, and we had to go into that lesson. They're like, really? I was like, yes. Okay, another question. Okay, these are high school students.
They're
Right.
wondering.
Yes,
Yeah.
like,
Well, and what's going through my mind, two things that you are combining in a beautiful way, and that is the relationships with white students, or the challenge for us to be, if all of our friends look like us,
Yes.
there's something wrong there.
yes.
So the challenge to have friends who are not like us, which you've been able to do, while also talking about the elephant in the room.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times, certainly in my life, really up until about 10 or 15 years ago, I had many African American friends, but we never talked about the elephant in the room. And so I really appreciate the way that you do that with everyone, particularly with your students,
Yes.
as you're helping them to learn. And I think that's part of the challenge, particularly for white Christians, predominantly white church such as ours, not just to have the relationships, the friendships, but be willing to acknowledge, as you say, the elephant in the room. And I think particularly for myself, for white Christians, that involves a lot of listening. And not listening so that assumptions can be challenged,
Yes.
and so that learning can take place.
Yes, because I tell my students, how can you hear what I'm saying if you're also talking?
Yeah.
I said, on purpose, God gave you one of these and two of these. Because he knew you would have to listen twice as much. Okay. So listening can do away with all the assuming. Because if you listen, but don't just listen, you listen to hear.
Yeah.
Because I can pretend to be listening in meetings, but I'm not hearing one thing. But your listening has to be on purpose. You have to purposely listen to hear what someone is saying. And even deeper than that, you have to be able to get to their heart. Like my kids will end up crying because, Miss TZ, I feel your heart. And you want to be able to listen to that point where that you can feel a person's heart, because then it will allow you to do away with the assumptions. Well, I thought this, and I thought, well, your thoughts were wrong. Now you're listening and you're really hearing. And I did this video for the protest at the Ritter Park. And I just shared from my heart and never expected it to do what it has done. But it was just a matter of my heart. And that's the way I share. And that all these thousands of people felt my heart. And so, which means that they weren't just listening, they were also hearing. So it really makes a difference when someone is sharing something that you actually hear, and not put up that wall. Because immediately a wall will go up.
Right.
Stop. Bring the wall down. And there's a song that says he'll do it again. I thought by now that these walls would have fallen, but here they are. So what are you going to do? God, I'm going to keep trusting in you that these walls are coming down, because none of this is of you. You are a God of love. You are a God of peace. You are a God of unity. You are a God of reconciliation. You are a God of healing brokenness. That's who you are. And so through these 64 years and all that I have gone through, and some things you will never know, I have had to keep love as the forefront. Like, love is my banner. It's my banner. And that's the banner I have to wear continually, because there are always going to be people. There are always going to be people that don't want to hear what you have to say, that don't want to take the time to understand. There's always going to be those people. But I have to make sure I'm always equipped with the banner of love, because I could allow them to affect my love life. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. And if I'm going to be a child of God, if I'm going to be used as God's vessel, that has to be the forefront love, because it covers a multitude.
Amen.
I mean, a multitude, and God knew we were going to need that. A multitude of sins, like, whoa, TC, put on love, please. Put it on. Wear it daily. Because when you wear it daily, you are not easily offended. You are not. You can just shake things off. And like, I had a little student that said every day in my classroom, I hate you, Mrs. TC. I hate you. You're the worst teacher in the whole wide world. Every day. And every day I would say, I love you. I love you. And he was like, you can't say that. And I was like, but I can, and I am. And the kids said, get over it, because she's never going to stop saying that, because she really does love you. So as soon as you understand that, you'll stop saying what you're saying.
So, Mrs. TC, thank you for sharing from your heart with us so authentically. One of the questions I've been thinking about is, what would you like to see, or what would you like to say to your white Christian brothers and sisters in Christ for such a time as this? Because we are, I believe, as a nation, coming to a time of reckoning with our past.
Yes.
And we know that our God is very much a God of grace and a forgiving God, and that repentance and reflection are also part of that process. So I just wanted to offer that and hear what you might say to that.
Well, my thought is, we have to stop surface talking. So I put on Facebook a little thing of two characters from Charlie Brown, Franklin and his friend, and they come to meet each other. And hello, I'm Franklin. It's nice to meet you. Okay, it's nice to meet you. Now what? Now can we sit down? Can we have a conversation? Can we not surface talk? Like, how does your hair really get curly? What makes your hair curl up when you get in the shower? Simple conversations. Or how does your skin really burn when you're out there, and how dark can you really get from being in the sun? Let's not surface talking. Oh, I like your hair color. I like the surface. Can we go deep? How do you feel being in a church where most of the people are white? How do you feel having a white pastor? And I was raised in the Baptist church. I told my mom when she first came from Virginia to visit that "Oh, Mom, I need to let you know my pastor is white." She's like, "Well, can he preach?" I said, "Yes." She's like, "Well, I'm fine." I was like, "Okay, woo, we're good with that." So just like, how does it feel being the only African American at your job? How does it feel when you go in the grocery store and you get a look? What does it feel like? Or how does it feel as a teenager being followed in the store as if you're going to steal something? And you politely turn around and say, "May I help you?" And they turn around and they walk away. So get to the meat of it. Picking at the skin will not get to the meat of it, because we need to have some serious conversations. And they're going to be very uncomfortable, but so what? I'm sure when Jesus hung on the cross, that was very uncomfortable. But his love kept him up there. Even when we could have cared less about him, his love kept him up there. So if he could do that, surely we could sit down and have uncomfortable conversations, and we can get to know about each other. Or like, "Miss TC, how did your eyes get blue today?" "Because I have blue contacts." "Oh, well, how did your hair get blonde?" Or "How does it get this long in one day?" It's called weave. Okay, so let's do real talk, okay, instead of surface talk. If I could bring you into my classroom just for one day, and how I talk with my kids, it would make a world of difference in your world outside of my classroom. But the surface talk is over, because the elephant has been exposed. Real talk. And I feel like there are days that I'm just walking in a fog. Like thinking like, my ancestors went through this, my grandmother went through this, my mom went through this, I'm going through this, my son is going through this, my grandchild will go through this. Why? Why are we still there? Especially when we call ourselves Christians. Why have we not taken a stand? We know there's a problem. Why have we not been more vocal? George Floyd was not the first one. He was not even the last one. And he will not be the last one. So why are we so comfortable in our sanctuaries not to talk about it? It's time to talk about it. It's time to shed tears. It's time to ask for forgiveness. It's time to give forgiveness. It's just time. And we are doing an injustice to our kids when we as adults don't talk about it, because we are confusing our children, and they are our future. They are our right now. And it is the young people that are leading this protest. And the majority of the people are not black people. They're white. Because we need each other to come together. And it's like a light has come on for white people, like, wait, this really is wrong. This really has to stop. And my kids would say, because when we share about how you're treated because of your color, their word is like, "That's really stupid." Who would think of that? And why would anybody think that because you're this color that you're better, or you're this color and you're not? And whoever thought it was okay to own somebody? Out of the mouth of babes. And it's just like, Mrs. TC, none of that makes sense. Even when women couldn't vote. And I set up an experiment in my classroom and told the boys, like, okay, so we're going to vote on a name for an activity we're going to be doing. But the girls are not allowed to vote. Only the boys. My boys are looking like, oh, that's not right. I said, because boys are so much smarter than girls. And my girls were like, okay, now she's lost it. But we did that, and the boys were like, Miss TC, that's not fair. But what does it have to do with fair? Who needs fair in this world? Miss TC, we don't do that in our classroom. I'm like, okay, so is there a problem? Yes, Miss TC, the girls should be allowed to vote. Even though they get on your last nerves, yes, they deserve to vote. But then we got to the right to vote. And because you were a woman, you couldn't. How is that right, Mrs. TC? It's not. But can I throw something else in? If you were a black woman, then you had to wait later to vote. And they're like, something is wrong. Do we own part of the White House? Aren't they supposed to be working for us in the White House? They can do something to change things, right, Mrs. TC? I'm like, surely they could. I mean, they're all intelligent people. Surely they could. And they're like, okay, then we need to write letters. And I said, well, maybe you need to be president. How about my whole 4th grade class be president of the United States? And we can solve so many issues because they are so tenderhearted. And even kids that come from homes where their parents may be racist, once they hit Mrs. TC, oops, there's a flip. Right. This will not be. And they will say, you know, our parents really maybe don't like black people. Shucks, they haven't met me, so that's the problem. So let's solve that problem.
Right.
Yes. So no longer on the surface. Let's dig deep. Let's have surgery. Let's have surgery. Let's dig deep. Let's heal the wounds. Let's stitch up the wounds. Let's get whatever disease is in there and let's clean that out and let's stitch it up so we can heal the wound the right way. And you know, in the healing, it's all love. Every stitch is a stitch of love. Every stitch has to be a stitch of love in order for it to really heal. Otherwise, we will be at this again and again. But every stitch has to be a stitch of love. For God so loved, for God so loved, for God so loved. And if we heal in love, if we stitch in love, there has to be a change. And then you'll be at my house for dinner,
Amen.
and I'll be at your house for dinner.
That's a deal.
And we'll spend time together. But I like to do things that are uncomfortable. Teaching at Kerman High School. Stopping at a yard sale, at a flea market at Kerman, me and my sister, and we're driving. I was like, let's stop. And we walk in. Of course we're the only black people. And of course they're looking at us. And I'm like, hey, hi. I taught at Kerman High School, and I remember one day I had to get a ride with one of my friends who was a black guy that worked at the gas station. I needed to ride with him. And so the kids are like, you can cross over the track and go the back way. Why? Why am I going to do that? And they're like, because there are no black people in Kerman. Yes, there are. There's 2 of us. But you don't want to walk the main street. Yes, really, I do. Well, if you're going to walk the main street, we're going to walk with you. I don't care. I walk by myself. You can walk with me. So as I'm walking through the town, small town of Kermit, there's like a traffic jam. People are stopping in their cars because there are no black people in Kermit, and black people don't walk through the town. So, because this is where I'm going to be for the rest of the year, and I know that. Hello! I am your new teacher. Please come see me. And I'm just waving. It's just like the kids are like, no, don't do that.
So they came with you?
Yes,
they
2
did
of
come
the
with you.
kids, 2 walk with me. But they had to know I was there. I am not going to be afraid. And if anybody's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be you. And it's not going to be me. And so that's why I just waved. And I just waved. And this is another thing I do. If I catch a white person staring at me, hello. It must be my hair color that has caught your attention. My name is Mrs. TC. You probably heard of me. I teach at Highland Elementary. I have heard of you. yes, this is me. But I knew it was my hair color that caught your attention, and not say it was my color that caught you off guard. And then, and another funny thing is, because we're not doing the surface anymore, when I meet white students at my school for the first time, and they're out at the grocery store, we're at the grocery store, and they'll break away from their parent to come running to me, and the parent are like, whoa, who is that? And I was like, hey, I'm Mrs. TC. Oh, they forgot to tell you I had a tan. They forgot to tell you that I had a tan. And she's just like, oh, you're Mrs. TC. I was like, yes, and I love your child, but you're not even their teacher. I was like, I know, but I make it a point to know everyone. So next time you see this skin color, just know it's Mrs. TC, because that was the first thing that caught them, was like, my white child is running to this black woman, and I don't know who she is.
Right.
And so, no more on the surface. We have to go deep in order to heal. We have to go deep.
Thank you for spending time with us.
My
and
pleasure.
For challenging us to go deep, and we're listening.
Yes.
And
you're not just listening, you're
we're
hearing.
hearing too,
Yes.
and hearing too.
Yes.
And we know that God is, just as He's doing wonderful things through your ministry as a teacher, through your calling,
Yes.
that God is using these conversations, not just listening, but hearing,
Yes.
for us to move forward together, for justice, for God's kingdom,
Yes.
for the love of Jesus. to
Because
be
we are the
known.
kingdom builders.
Amen.
We are. And we are the light of the world.
Yes.
We dispel the darkness. The darkness does not overtake the light. No way. Because just one light dispels the darkness.
And Jesus is able to work through
Yes.
just that one light. Would you end our conversation with prayer? Would you pray for us?
Yes, yes. Heavenly Father, this is a day that you alone have made, God. We will continue to rejoice and to be glad in it, God. We know that you are a perfecter of everything that concerns us, God. None of this has caught you by surprise, God. And God, I thank you that you are a just God. You are a loving God. You are a kind God. You have opened up your heart for us to expose to the world, God. We are the billboard that the world needs, God. We are the light of the world, God. And God, it is my desire, it is our desire, God, that your light shines forth, God. And that people would begin to see you. And that the healing from the hurt would begin, God. And God, we know that is only possible through your love, God. So God, you have placed us here for such a time as this, to be the love that will extend out to others, God. And that we are the voice over evil. Love always overcomes evil, God. And God, and so as we go through these changes, God, may the banner of love continue to be over us. May it totally consume us, God. May we not just meet at that bridge, God, but may we join hands and may we walk across that bridge together, God, because we no longer want to pretend that the elephant is not in the room, God. So God, we thank you because you are a good God, and everything that you desire for your people is good. And what the enemy meant for evil, God, I trust you, I believe you, that you are turning around for our good, God. And you will get the glory, you will get the honor, you will get the praise, and the people will know that you reign. God, you reign. You reign, God. And evil is always under our feet. Evil is of Satan, and Satan is a defeated foe. And God reigns victorious. Your word says, for you know the thoughts and plans you have for us. They are to prosper us, not to harm us, to give us hope, a future, a final outcome. And the final outcome is that you always cause us to triumph in Christ Jesus. So God, right now, I thank you that we are triumphant today over all things that the enemy tries to bring against us, God, and that you will reign forever. In your precious name I pray, amen, amen.
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 Amen. And we can't give you a hug right now, but there will be a day when,
Yes.
Long
when
distance
we
hug.
can.
Yes, thank you so much.
I'm going to show up just for a hug.
You got it.
We love
You
it.
got it.
I'm
And
gonna
we
show
thank
up.
you for tuning in tonight, and we pray God's blessings as we continue to listen and to hear and to love, and
Yes.
to carry that banner of love, the love of Jesus, over us all. Good night, everybody.